Well, good evening, afternoon. This feels like evening. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Listen with Vobes on Monday, the 8th of February. It's my son's birthday today. He's 25 or 26. I'm not quite sure how old he is. Anyway, I need to still work that out because he said 26 yesterday, and then he said, no, I'm 25. And then I said, wait, I'm confused. Anyway, somebody else can work that out for me. He was born in 93. No, he wasn't. God, he was born in 95. So that makes him 26, doesn't it? That makes him 26. That's what I thought. But his son, he hasn't got a son. I don't want to drink more of the funny juice. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Listen with Vobes, with me, Richard Vobes. And we are reading a Peep show in a book form. And I will be using words today to convey the meaning of this book to you, the gentle listener. Lovely Julia, hello to you. TurboStream, Arworth, Linda Kane, TurboStream, I've said. Tall Paul Rog. I need to talk to you, actually, Mr. Rog, because I know you do theatre design, don't you? Somebody else emailed me about the new studios and said, could he give a hand? And I thought, I better pass this by Tall Paul Rog, because he may better help me design the new studios. Studios. The bit at the back. Holly and Co, good afternoon. Heidi ho to you. Billabong O'Neill. Linda Kane says she's put the fire on. I've only been out 3 times today. Wait a minute. You're not allowed out more than once, are you? To fill up the bird feeders and bring the recycling bin in. Oh, that's all right. The excitement is just too much. Oh, too much. Good afternoon to John F., Audrey Forbes, to Justine Jones, to Dave of Yawn. TurboStream, I think I've said umpteen times. Ed Loud, and Philip Hammond and Mary. By the way, Mary has been assigned to make me tank tops for the spring. Very exciting. These are Mary. You've heard of Mary Quant? Well, let me tell you, Mary Hammond, who used to knit for Harrods, don't you know? Yeah, she did. That's true. Used to knit for Harrods. And so look at this. Priceless. Priceless. Anne H., good afternoon to you. Jen Colley, hello to you. Richard, yes, theatre design. I would love to chat to you about your new studios. And, what's that that's just snapped off in my hand? Studios, my goodness, it's gone and done it. This time next year, we'll have forgotten all about us and he'll be accepting a BAFTA. I might be accepting what rhymes with BAFTA? MAFTA? Dafter. I'll be receiving a Dafter. Because who is Dafter? Right, we are on chapter 6, ladies and gentlemen. Ben Reeve sneaked in. Yes, there we are. So how old is he? How much snow here in Stokenchurch? Snowed all day, but about as deep as a grasshopper's knee. Oh, blimey. I was made to wear tank tops as a toddler, says TurboStream. I love them. NAFTA. Yes, NAFTA. I'll be receiving a NAFTA. Thank you, Julia. Right, this is chapter 6. Andrew Norris is yet to arrive, but he may well be snowed in where he is in Croatia. There have been times when we would have looked at Lynmouth as something to admire and enjoy, and have been pleasantly thrilled to find it trying to imitate Chamonix. That's not how you pronounced it, is it? Chamonix? With its tea balconies over the rocky streams. But now, with the living to get, we looked upon the picturesque, little town with a sinister intent. We did not study the different boarding houses and hotels, or worry about the holiday fashions, but we came out of the woods like wild men and watched our crowd with a professional eye. We found them far from satisfactory. These holiday makers would not keep still, and they would not move altogether. While a few walked on the promenade, some strolled on the beach. While some went about their shopping, others took the Cliff Railway up to Linton. Other parties went away from the town in charabancs, and others, with rucksacks on their backs, set off to trudge the moors. There seemed to be no crying need for a puppet show. It all looked as if the life of Lynmouth would have managed to get on quite well without one. Oh, you don't pronounce the X in Chamonix. Is it Chamonix? Is it like Chamonix, like the cloth you clean your car with? Is that a Chamonix leather? Or is that a chamois? But a showman would soon starve if he thought like that about the world. In Lynmouth, if Lynmouth was so satisfied as to think itself complete and perfect as it was, for us to force our way in, and for our puppets to behave in such a delightful and attractive manner as to make them If Lynmouth was so self-satisfied as to think itself complete and perfect, it was for us to force a way in, and for the puppets to behave in such a delightful and attractive manner as to make themselves indispensable. Inspired with this intent, we packed up the show after lunch and negotiated the difficult path back to town. It was not long before some children joined us, and we all clattered through the streets to the promenade, where we set up our castello before the two old lime kilns. Some people were interested in our proceedings at once, and very properly took up their seats on the promenade wall, while a row of children settled on the curbstone. William blew his trumpet, and I disappeared into the theatre to work the puppets. After all, there was quite a stir of excitement at our appearance in Lynmouth, and our coming seemed to be the right and inevitable thing. Cheers. Here he is. He's waded in through the snow. Mr. Norris, how the devil are you? Chamonix. Oh, Chamonix. Thank you very much. Chamonix. What is a Chamonix, anyway? It's a place, isn't it? Sorry, what's a castello? Because he talks about we set up our castello. Anyone know what that is? That's not, puff, one of those big fat cigars, is it? A castello. Oh, no, that was, what was that? The big fat cigars that only Benson and Hedges did. The performance started smoothly, and the audience began to laugh, but was suddenly sent scattering by an enormous charabanc. This beast took up its stand 6 yards away, and the puppets had to struggle against its roarings and pantings. The crowd came together again in the roadway, and the performance continued. Whiz, bang, crash. The beast, having discharged its load, turned round, made a fresh charge through the crowd, and roared away down the high street. Feeling that we were at the end of this interruption, we went on with renewed vigour. But alas, it was not long before a similar behemoth turned the corner, rattling and roaring its clumsy way through our affairs. With a third and fourth attack, the truth was forced unpleasantly upon us. We had taken up our stand at the starting and return point of all the motor and charabanc trips. Silly. Castella, that was what I was thinking of. Yes, Castella. Castella. Puff, puff. The mild cigar from Benson and Hedges. Is Benson and Hedges still going? Or have they been clipped? Is it Ben and Edge now? Not today, Linda, but the end of the week. But, what is Andrew Norris butting about? But. There was such a racket that I could not keep in contact with the audience and shut up the curtains. I felt like a mad showman performing to myself amid a wild uproar of mad motor cars. They passed and repassed continually and hooted and grated their brakes in a frenzy of derision. It was a dismal business to be shouting out silly jokes into nowhere for no one to laugh at, and it was only that I heard the occasional clink of pennies into William's hat that I kept going. We mended matters a little, and amused the children vastly by carrying the theatre boldly to the other side of the road, where, with the cars passing behind us, we contrived to perform until all the people had gone to dinner. Considerably dazed by this noisy experience, we returned with relief to the sanity and the almighty quietness of the ravine. Like a couple of brigands, we sat on either side of the road in this romantic glen, eating our supper and counting our spoils. This had been our record collection, a matter of 8 shillings and 4pence. It was also our last joint together, for the next day William, much to his regret, was returning to respectable life. Perhaps he was a little consoled that evening as we prepared ourselves, and the minute tent for sleeping. As we did it all in a sitting posture or on all fours, he may have looked forward to his spacious bedroom and bathroom. There is no room for pillow fights or any slapdash work when your bedchamber for two only measures 6 feet in length and 4 foot wide, and 3 inches in height. 3 foot 6 inches in height. Oh, 3 foot! I thought he meant 3 inches in height. I thought, what do they? You all right? Yeah, I'm in there. Yeah, nice and comfy. Yeah, it's coat. 3 inches, yes, 3 inches, 3 foot 6 inches, that's right. We had to behave with meticulous care. We packed everything away like cats. How do cats pack things? Do they pack things away like that? We were rather amused with ourselves out there in the wild ravine to compare our quarters with the civilised hotels and boarding houses only 100 yards away. There, just round the corner, everyone would be in bed in spacious comfort. Even their beds alone would take up more space than our whole house. They could walk about, they could brush their hair with flourishes, they could stand up and put on their pyjamas. There was room to pull on one's shirt off there. While the toffs were enjoying themselves in the hotels, we were having a tough time. After I hit William on the nose, and William had struck his anatomy into the tent and nearly broke the whole tabernacle down, we had an argument and then a demonstration as to whether it was safer to don our pyjamas in a sitting, a kneeling, or a reclining position. If the hotels were more spacious, our little tent was certainly more amusing. Sorry, I was just looking at the comments there. Thought you had a dirty mark on your jumper, then realised it was on the screen. Or is it the shadow? Is it the shadow of this? Shadow of the microphone. Oh, on your screen. Oh, fair dues. Holly & Co says, at the back of the comic books we used to see advertising for exploding cigars, itching powder and X-ray vision glasses. Oh, yes, they were the days. And Audrey Forbes says, in 1920, 7 and 6 is worth £37 and 37 pence these days. Is it? £37. And Nigel said, OK, quick quiz. Next Monday, the 15th of February, will be the 50th anniversary of what? What do you mean the 50th anniversary of what? 50 years ago, on the 15th of February. Well, it's got nothing to do with Valentine's Day, but something. It's not the Valentine's Day massacre, is it? Is that what it will be in Chicago? Although that would have been on the 14th of February, wouldn't it? Or has the day, you going by the exact day? 50 years ago. Well, is it your birthday, Nigel Sadler? Are you 50? Of your birth. I bet it's your birth, which is a bit like the Chicago massacre. Decimalisation? Oh, is it decimalisation? All right, fair enough. It would be surprised to pack away like cats. I wouldn't be surprised. Nigel Sadler, 1971. Oh. Is it the decimalisation? Is that what it is? Sounds about right to me, 1971. Anyway, 15th of Linda Kane now says decimalisation. Perhaps you all see these in a different order than I see it. Anyway, I'm not going to wait. Where the hell was I on this marvellous little story that we have got? Should this catch the eye of any Punch and Judy man in need of help, I can recommend William as the first-rate companion. A good, sturdy puller, a cheerful comrade, and an unflinching collector. His puppets will amuse and interest anyone, anywhere, at any time. And, on the basis of our earnings for the week, there is no doubt that he's worth every bit of his share of the proceedings, which was 13 shillings and 7.5 pence. There we are. What's that then, Audrey Forbes Hamilton? What is 13 shillings and 7p halfpenny? So, here was the end of our week's venture on the road. We had travelled on foot and by train and by steamer from the Cotswolds to Devonshire. We had slept on the edge of the Cotswolds, on the heights over Bristol, by the sea in the lovely Porlick Bay, in a field on Exmoor, which had probably been ploughed up by the girt Jan Rid. And we finished up with an ideal camp on the banks of the famous River Lynn. We were as brown as berries and our appetites were enormous. We were charmed with our experiences, but we were not proud of our accounts. Our expenditure had been £3, 14 shillings and 8p halfpenny, whilst our takings for 5 shows, together with 2 shillings for saving the life of a motorist, amounted only to £1, 7 shillings and 3p. Financially, this was a catastrophe. Bankruptcy, in fact, for a man with his living to get. In future, there would be no more jaunts on steamships or bottles of ginger pop or tea with jam and Devonshire cream in elegant tea shops. From now onwards, the showman must settle down to the job in grim earnest, show here, there and everywhere, live on his takings and clear off his debts. 67p? Can't be 67. What? 13 shillings and 7p halfpenny is 67p. It's gone down in money. Normally it goes up. You don't know what you're talking about. Coming in here with your 50 years, here's a quick question. 1971, blah, blah. What a load of old. If I had one of those big ejector seat levers, Mr. Sadler, you'd be flying through the sky. Only to land on a nice, obviously, a nice pile of hay, of course, with a buxom dairymaid in there ready to capture your every need. Anyway, promises. Our expenditure had been... Wait a minute. We were not proud. I read all that. You've just read all that? Yeah, no, I just read all that. The 37, by 7:30 the next morning, good morning. Is that Farmer Piles? What are you doing here? Get out of it. By 7:30 next morning, William and the works of William Shakespeare in one volume were away. Oh, that's a shame. I thought that was a bit of a running joke, and the wonders of the Shakespeare's. I thought that was a bit of a running joke that we would keep getting. £67 and 68. Yes, there we are. Audrey Forbes knows the right numbers. Goodness gracious. Audrey Forbes is onto a good thing. By 7:30 next morning, William and the works of William Shakespeare in one volume were away, and I was left down in Lynmouth, cut off from everywhere by sensational hills. But there was a practical aspect about Linton which persuaded me to try and stay until the next week. I hoped for a few shillings each day on the promenade, and there were several jobs I wanted to do. For one thing, I wished to take advantage of the River Lynn. It was such an excellent bathroom and wash house. In a few days, I could get good clean-up and prepare for the travelling again to new worlds and new adventures. But that afternoon, when I, the Peep show, and a group of noisy children arrived on the promenade, a large policeman was very much in evidence. I love that expression. Oh, look, there's a large policeman very much in evidence. It's very good, isn't it? Especially as policemen give evidence. It's very cleverly written. Very clever. Oh, my goodness. He fixed a stern eye upon me as I came up the road, which mesmerised me into leaning over the promenade wall by his side and discussing the possibilities of performing. He told me it was not for him to give me permission to perform. All he could do was to stop me. At the same time, he was evidently distressed at having to prevent a fellow mortal from making his living, and a good chap proceeded to outline a method of procedure. The first thing for me to do was to apply to the town council, which met once a month. If I could not wait so long as that, perhaps the chairman would be able to fix it up for me. The council meeting was that very moment up in Linton, and if I was to wait there where I was, I could see the chairman coming down in the Cliff Railway, as he always did after a meeting, and get to his house in Lynmouth. The constable introduced me, and my affair, to a man who was hanging about after... he had introduced me to a man who was hanging about and left us, and so I and the man leaned on the wall and chatted. Marvellous affair, and a mystery, this idle man, who lent himself so easily to my business. In about an hour's time, the unsuspecting chairman was pointed out to me as he left the station, and further, he was recommended as a gentleman, a real gentleman. So, trembling in my boots, I stopped the chairman in his comfortable, reflective-looking progress and explained to him that I would like to do a sort of Punch and Judy show there for a few days. Well, yes. He looked at his boots, knocked a stone with his stick, and looked at me again. I said it would be a very good show, quite a special affair, and would really be quite an honour to Lynmouth. He seemed this seemed to amuse him, and his eyes twinkled. Yes, well, I will give you permission. You can do it here. And he pointed to a little garden between the cafe and the lime kilns. But mind this, you must not interfere with the musicians down on the promenade. They pay rent to perform every evening, and I can't have you interfering with their business. I solemnly promised to the trio. I said that in a very strange way, didn't I? I solemnly promised that the trio should be free of my competition, which seemed to amuse him still further, for he chuckled, pinched my arm jovially, and said, "Well, if you make a lot of money, you can pay us a big rent for your pitch." I said nothing would give me more pleasure than to be in a position to pay an enormous rent. "Ha, ha, ha! Well, yeah, that's all right. Yes, you can do your show there for a week." He shook hands with me, this real gentleman, a deed which was witnessed by all the chauffeurs, the boatmen, and the odd townspeople who went around, who at that moment treated me as a friend and a brother. I put up the show at once and got to work. This was my first attempt to perform and collect by myself in the street, and all I could do was to gather a crowd by showing for a little and then frightening them all away by going out with the... Let me just read that again. This was my first attempt to perform and collect by myself in the street, and all I could do was to gather a crowd by showing for a little and then frightening them all away by going out with the hat. I was consoled by a friendly old couple who described me to the mean people who ran away when I appeared. They even pointed out the actual people very indignantly and wanted me to run down the road after them. I continued these exasperating tactics until the dinner hour and then retired with 3 shillings. A new difficulty confronted me the next day. A large gentleman in tweeds stopped me in the town and wanted to know how our ad said I could pitch my tent by the river. When I explained the part which the boys had played in the matter, his eyes nearly came out of his head. Wait a minute. Sorry about this. I'm just trying to work this out. Uad, it's got here OO''AD, which I thought was our ad. Uad said I could pitch my tent by the river. When I explained the part which the boys had played in the matter, his eyes nearly came out of his head, and he uttered one word, "Boys!" in an explosion of contempt. I stood up for the boys and commended their hospitality and Christian conduct, but he was immovable as a rhinoceros, this stout, florid man, and the upshot of our conversation was that I would have to go, that he was the keeper of the river and responsible for the fishing, and that if I didn't move, take myself off quickly, he would soon find the ways of shifting me. Sorry about that. Sometimes you get these sentences and just think, I don't know what that means. So that evening after the show, the kind owners of the cloakroom in the town allowed me to leave the old encumbrance in their back garden. I love the way that his booth on its wheels, right from the start, is called the old encumbrance. Apparently, we are all helping to protect those who haven't had it. What are you on about? Thank you, Julia. Oh, all okay after vaccine, Linda Kane. Had mine on Saturday. Dudley High Lee. Thank you, Julia. Nice warm one. We have you on GPS now, Lee and Linda, after your vaccine, tracing your every move. All right. Okie dokie. But what a ridiculous place for a camper this Lynmouth is. Wait a minute. Yes, sorry, I've skipped a bit there. Yes, I was just saying that from the start, he was calling the old encumbrance, which can't be an old encumbrance when it's really a new encumbrance, but I like the way he does it. Anyway, that was my point. To be exact, I piled on the pieces on top of the chicken run. What? To be exact, I piled up the pieces on top of their chicken run, much to the consternation of the chickens. Then, with the sleeping sack and the ground sheet in the rucksack, I set off to explore a new pitch and to spend the fine night entirely in the open. But what a ridiculous place for a camper this Lynmouth is. For all my searching, I only found a sloping bed on the heather on the open hillside, which tormented me with dreams about rolling down into the abyss beneath. At 3 o'clock in the dim moonlight, I tucked the bed under my arm and struggled back to the original pitch to finish my sleep there. Not quite sure what's going on, really. But anyway, I'd already been well treated by several good sorts in this Devonshire, and now the boatman had recommended another to me in the shape of Phil Jones, a farmer who lived on the Barnstable Road about half an hour out of Linton, who, according to them, would be sure to let me camp. So on the Saturday evening, the Peep show went up the Cliff Railway to Linton and set out to find this hospitable man. He was away for the day, but his wife made no difficulties about the matter, and I settled down on a delightful little lawn among some gorse bushes by the side of a stream, a clear tumbling affair of rocks and pools and waterfalls. And there I remained for the next day. Mr. Jones came along to have a look at me and discovered that I was not camping on his ground, but on his neighbour's, so he made no objections to me remaining where I was. On both Monday and Tuesday afternoons, the puppets performed again on the promenade, and each day I secured my bread and cheese. With the chairman's permission to perform, and the charming camp on the Barnstable Road, I began at last to feel at home. There was a friendliness about the people there, which made my stay a pleasant holiday. All the children knew me, and I could not get through the town without a dozen young friends attaching themselves to the Peep show man. The boatmen, who seemed to be doing little boating, were glad of the diversion, and every afternoon at least a dozen would sit on the wall in a blue-jerseyed row and watch the show. When I refused to collect from these old friends, one of them went along the row with his hat and brought me the pennies he had collected. They discussed me up and down the true village parliament. They discussed me up and down in true village parliamentary fashion, and the good opinion of these frank, sturdy men of the sea sustained me considerably in the practice of this new profession. The Peep Show had won their hearts, and they wanted me to stay all summer. They swore fiercely at the officious man who had shifted me from my original camp by the Lynn, sending him to the devil, urging me to defy him by going back again. They laughed at my pact with the chairman and incited me to knock out the Promenade Orchestra by performing when they played and getting their audience from them. The puppets were a mystery to them. They imagined them full of springs, that I threw my voice, that the theatre was full of mechanism, and they made me blush by saying in their bluff, seaman-like way that it was a dashed clever show for one dashed man to do all by his own dashed self. What they liked best was that bit about the parson having his boxing lesson. During these days, because these are the days before television, you've got to remember that, they weren't sitting there watching the puppet show thinking, oh yeah, I wonder if the puppets could go in the Big Brother house. Little did they know that it's a well-known fact that Walter Wilkinson was the great-great-grandfather of Jerry Anderson, who went on to do Thunderbirds. That may actually be made up just for Nigel Sadler's delectable ears. During these days, I was able to develop the performance a little, to experiment with some of the new scenes and introduce some new properties. Besides that famous volume of Shakespeare which William had brought to read in his quiet moments, he had brought also a piece of wood out of which he was going to carve a wooden spoon in his other quiet moments. The Shakespeare he took away with him unopened, and this piece of wood he left behind untouched. One morning I had carved a demon from this embryo wooden spoon, painted it green, and, by sacrificing all my darning wool, had provided it with a shock of wavy hair. This ferocious mixture of wooden spoon and darning wool had now become the genie of the magic chest, and always finished up that scene with the terrific combat with John Barleycorn. Sorry, it just reminded me, I just needed to look into my filing cabinet to see how much of my darning wool I've got left. Oh, darn it. I've pretty much run out. Those socks will never get done. The boatmen were not the only patrons from whom I gathered flattering remarks, as well as pennies, and after these 2 weeks of showmanship, I was beginning to feel assured that it was possible, even in this clever, scientific, mechanical, superb age, to amuse both the sophisticated and the unsophisticated with a simple puppet show. There are, of course, a number of delightful people in the world, such as myself, who, as soon as you mention puppets to them, will go off in a series of extravagant exclamations, such as, "Oh, how charming! Wonderful! So quaint!" and the like. But here, in the street, were people who had no special prejudice for things old-fashioned and artistic. These took the show at its face value, as a lively affair which made one couple miss their train to Linton, which made one man put sixpence in the hat and say, "Ah, a penny! Why, you're a clever fella, you know. That's clever work." And another man to remark that he made 7pence, which I had got out of him, he having already given a penny to his 2 children 3 times to see the show. I admired the people who could speak out their minds like this. It was a good lesson to me in nice manners, these agreeable remarks, and in future I may never hesitate to speak my appreciation to these marvellous street performers one sometimes sees, such as the man who plays Wagner on 2 tin whistles, or the genius who plays in Italian opera on a Japanese fiddle made from a rusty dented tin and a bent hazel stick. On my way back to the camp on the Tuesday evening, I found myself walking level with a young mother pushing a perambulator. We entered into conversation, during which she suggested that I do a show in her village of Linbridge. I pleaded tiredness, at which she was very scornful. "Tired?" she said. "What, tired? With pulling a little thing like that up the hill? You do we a show? Come us." Oh, hang on. "You do we a show. Come, us wants to see it. We heard so much about it." I forgot it's like that, isn't it, down there, and it's that sort of North Devon thing. Yeah, that's right, yeah, see? Tired? Tired? What, pulling a little thing like that up the hill? You do we a show. Come and we want come up and do it. We wants to see it. We've heard so much about it, see? That's what we wants. I succumbed to that tyrant, fame, as the saying goes, and rigged up the theatre in a court between the cottages. The young woman, 2 or 3 other mothers and some children got very excited and went off with shouts and laughter to rouse the rest of the village, which was simply only a row of a dozen cottages. A mixed audience of about 30 gathered round. They listened very attentively, silenced the children, chased away the barking dog, and remonstrated with a young woman who laughed too loud and too long. They all laughed a good deal, and they rounded off each turn very satisfactorily with applause. When I had finished, I gave them my hat to make a contribution, which they took readily enough, and returned to me containing 3 shillings 7 halfpenny. There was a good deal of friendly banter while I was packing up. They knew all about my little tent down the road. Wouldn't I like someone to sleep with me for company like? Wouldn't I like someone to help me pull the truck along? Why, you must be lonely. You ought to have someone with you. You ought to have a Judy. By this time, several of them had seized a struggling girl and pulled her up to me. But as soon as they let go, she disappeared with shrieks into the back of one of the houses, and the Peep show fled for its life back down to camp. But 3 little girls, very excited, came running along and accompanied me. They longed to come over the river and see the tent, but the stepping stones were too far apart for their short strides. They stood debating how to get over them, when suddenly the boldest, with quite a wild shout, walked deliberately up to her knees through the water. The other 2 urchins, equally excited, with cheeks flushed and eyes flashing, with more shouts, soon followed her. They nearly danced with excitement when they found knives and forks and pots and pans in the tent. "Ain't it nice? It's proper, ain't it?" they repeated continually, and with such glowing eyes that they increased my pride of ownership. They seemed unable to tear themselves away, but eventually, as it grew dark, they set off for the village very reluctantly, wading through the river again. I waited about rather nervously for some time, half expecting a visit from some angry parents who would want to know what I meant by making their children get their shoes and stockings wet, but no, I was left undisturbed to sleep that night, calmly away on the green turf by the rippling brook. It says something about the times, does it not, if 3 little girls can disappear and wade through a river and enter a single man's tent in the middle of nowhere, and no parent comes chasing afterwards to see what's going on. That's the end of that chapter. We're on chapter 7. How are we doing? 25-2. Lynmouth is essentially one road to the seafront, with the A39 going up towards Purlock one way and up towards Lynmouth on the other. Not much flat ground at sea level. That would explain a lot. He's not a farmer in Devon, though. Who's not a farmer? Oh, perhaps they mean old as in the old-fashioned thing, the old encumbrance. Ah, yes, that's a good point. Very good point. I picked up that accent when I was in Plymouth 20-ish years ago. You're known as a Janna if you speak like that down there. Is that right? I try not to. I've got knitting needles, says Dudley Sawyer. You doing a bit of knitting there, are you? Is that what you're doing in your house during the lockdown, is it? Is that what you're up to, young Dudley? Good for you. Someone's got to, haven't they? Right. We would commence on chapter 7. In the grey weather, and feeling almost melancholy at leaving friendly Lynmouth, I turned inland and set off the next morning towards Barnstaple. There was no necessity or particular reason for going there, but it was plain that Linton and Lynmouth was not a suitable pitch in which to make a longer stay. For one thing, it seemed so cut off from the rest of the world, and for another, I had to camp so far away from the scene of the action. During the week I had collected £1, 16 shillings and twopence halfpenny. Later in the season, with more visitors, collections would have improved, but against that there would have arisen the question of rent and the engagement of a collector. But besides making its fortune, the Peep Show had other ambitions to consider. It was to travel, to see the world, and to gain experience both for itself as a show and for its showman as a man. It was not to settle down and grow sleek on 30 shillings a week, but to get lively and interesting by encountering always fresh conditions and new audiences. So the showman looked at his map, admired the road to Barnstaple, decided upon going there and showing at Paracombe and Bratton Fleming on the way. I trundled along between the hedges for a mile or so, buying milk from a farm, bread from a shop, and paraffin from a garage, and I was just settling down to enjoy the rural beauties of a greener Devonshire, as a change from the rocky glens and seascapes of Lynmouth, when I found my thoughts diverted and concentrated upon the task of getting the old encumbrance up that good Devonshire hill, Dean Steep. To the holiday maker... Sorry, that sounded rather distorted. To the holiday maker, walking from hotel to hotel hills may be picturesque. Ding! And add a piquancy to his travels. But as I zigzagged up Dean Steep with frequent halts, I found myself engaged in a grim struggle with this beautiful nature. She was offering a weighty resistance to the progress of the Peep Show. Every yard was a stiff tug against her powers, and it was not until I stood in triumph on the summit of Dean Steep, 1,800 feet above sea level, that I was at liberty to admire and worship her. Then I sat on the roadside wall and, with the help of a cigarette, enjoyed a vast and sombre panorama of Exmoor hills and valleys over which grey mists were rolling. All the morning the road went up and down through this lonely world on the edge of the moor. The rare farms stood wide apart in the sparse country, and over them, against the sky, ran the dark undulations of Exmoor. I met no one to talk to, and no one to look at. I was alone with the fields, with the wild birds, with a great stormy sky and the wind. But I was not lonely, for it seemed to me that all these things were alive, and that I was part of them, as they part of me. And they seemed great companions, immense with life and purpose. And as I and the show trundled along together in this free way, I dared to think of greater things than puppets, of those mysterious reasons which had sent me on the road as a vagabond. I remembered now how, as a schoolboy, I had read Morris's News from Nowhere, and how I was fascinated by it and so drawn into it that ever since I've always more or less wandered in that utopia of artistic work and fine weather. As boys of past ages have been inspired to run away to sea and seek El Dorado, so was I inspired to run away from all the ugly mess of machinery and commercialism and look for utopia, which is a very proper impulse in these days when all the unknown lands seem to be discovered, when the only discoveries we can make are in new ways of living. And on this morning, at least, I was content to think that I had discovered some sort of utopia. I was ridiculously happy in shoving my show along this country road. I was happy, and who can be happier than that? I lunched in a pleasant meadow, bright with buttercups and purple clover, with tall bunches of green reeds shaking their feathery crests. A flock of unbelievably white geese wandered about, entertaining me with their irresponsible doings, while the air was lively with circling and crying peewits. Although it was raining a little, I would not at all at that moment have changed my clean, fresh restaurant for all the marble and carpeted affairs of Paris, New York, and London. In the afternoon, ready for some company after the lonely morning, I walked into Paracombe, and the first person I encountered was a retired old gentleman taking a stroll. His eyes sparkled at the sight of a Punch and Judy show, and he hoped that I would stop and give them a turn. Paracombe is a real Devonshire village, with its pretty cottages running steeply down the hill to the old-fashioned hotel and its stable-yards. In the centre of the street is a little cobbled square, and a real mixed-up village shop and post office combined. I spoke to everyone I met about camping sites and about a performance, and acting upon the advice thus gathered, I knocked at the hotel door, which was opened by a boy. To my terror, he went off to awaken the landlord, who was taking his afternoon nap, and I trembled to think at his rage at being disturbed by a ragged, itinerant Punch and Judy man. But there is a magic charm about Mr. Punch, and when the proprietor of the hotel appeared, he was actually smiling at the good news. He at once gave me permission to camp in his fields, and on his own initiative urged me to perform in front of his establishment that very evening. "I ain't seen a Punch and Judy show for years," he said. "I remember old Professor Smith of Bristol used to perform at Ilfracombe Beach. Dear old Professor Smith, he was the best showman in all the West Country. Ha ha! Oh, he did it so well. I saw his show 100 times as a boy. I shall never forget him, and I always laugh to myself when I think of these little figures." He repeated his suggestion to perform before his hotel, and I did not hesitate to fall in with this arrangement. I bought some food in the shop and took care to tell the postmistress that there would be a show in the evening, as I imagined that she would be a good advertising agent. Then I pulled up the lane to the hotel field and settled down in a delightful corner to enjoy a comfortable tea. I took great pains to set the tent squarely and laid out my little belongings to make the interior as furnished and homely as possible. And I was just congratulating myself upon having done things so well arranged. I had just congratulated myself upon having things so well arranged when, outside the tent, I heard footsteps coming through the grass and a sudden hoarse voice exclaim, "Ho! What are you doing then?" I poked my head out the tent and found a grim old countryman sternly inspecting the encampment and the truck. What are you doing then?" he exclaimed again. "I'm doing a Punch and Judy show," I said. "A Punch and Judy show? But what are you doing in here then?" "I'm going to sleep tonight. The landlord of the hotel said I could camp here." "But This field don't belong to the hotel." I soon found out that I had pulled in at the wrong gate, and that the old man did not want me in his field, being afraid of his landlord, and that there was nothing to do but dismantle the tent and set it all up again in the next field. All the same, the grim old chap made his amends when he said that I must do the show in the village, and that if I didn't do it too early, he would come along and see it. After tea, I trundled the show round the village, advertising the performance to begin in an hour's time, and finally put it up opposite the White Hart Hotel, in a wide stable yard opening off the street. The children came round at once and clamoured for me to begin immediately, but for their cheek I sent them off to get some pennies and to tell their parents to come along. In half an hour a fair crowd had assembled, some of which were bold enough to stand in the stable yard quite near the theatre, but the shy portion stood under the hotel across the road and was frequently cut off by passing cars. After a collection, which felt quite heavy in the bag, and feeling flattered because the landlord had said that I was as good as Professor Smith, I presented them with another turn, which they all stayed to see, and I was packing up as I was packing up, one of the audience brought me more pennies, to which he had collected in his hat. I was interested to find the landlord comparing me favourably with the famous Professor Smith. The traditional Punch and Judy drama has taken a romantic hold upon the affectations of the people, and it seemed to me no light task to put up a new and original show as a rival to this time-honoured performance, which has been moulded, developed and perfected in the hands of thousands of clever showmen all over the world. It was altogether a pleasant experience to set up the show in this simple way. I always have an uncomfortable feeling that I'm walking into a sort of private concern when I enter a small village, where nearly all the inhabitants are related, or at least must have very intimate knowledge of one another. This evening, before the show, the audience had looked at me searchingly. They had made me feel a stranger. They were all Tom and Bill and Harry to one another, but they addressed me as Mr. However, after the show, I was surrounded by a friendly circle, all talking at once, and as I pulled off to the camp, it was reassuring to hear their invitations to come again. In the lane, I encountered the third old man of Paracombe. He was a bent and twisted labourer, so old that he seemed to have forgotten all about this world as he hobbled along, pipe in mouth, his eyes absorbed in the roadway. He stopped as we met, surveyed my affair coolly from under his shaggy eyebrows, and asked what I might be doing, if I would excuse his asking. At the very mention of Punch and Judy, this old chap, so like a piece of carved mahogany, began to tremble. "What? Punch and Judy? You're going to do it now? You're going to do it in the village?" His wooden limbs were galvanized with life, and his old eyes illuminated with a lively anticipation. I explained that I had just performed and was going away. An awful shade of disappointment crossed his face, and he looked at me fiercely. He tottered a step or two nearer, pulled his pipe from his mouth, and spat vehemently, disgustedly on the ground. "What? Just finished? No, dang it all, I wish I'd known, dang it! Nobody told me about it, dang it! If only I'd known, I'd have been there." It was my turn now to be disappointed. If it had not been growing so dark, and if I had not been so exhausted, I would have done a show for him there and then in the lane, in response to the feeling which he dismayed. It was the one cloud on the proceedings at Paracombe that this silly old enthusiast for Punch and Judy had not been in the audience. And we now enter chapter 8, ladies and gentlemen, which we will leave as we shut the gate on today's proceedings. Thank you very much for coming along. I hope it's been interesting. Quick look at the comments. I've got a bit of darning wool, says Lee Lawson. Why does that not surprise me? Ben Reeve says Lymouth is essentially a one. See, you read all that. I'm going to get some. Read that. I picked up, says Ben Reeve. That I read that. He didn't do too badly for money collecting. He's really only had to buy food. That's true. I'm following on the map, says TurboStream. Another one, Audrey. And Lee Lawson says, why does Walter keep calling it a Punch and Judy show when it isn't? And he had decided to call it a Peep show. Puzzled of Broadwater. Yes, I think the genre is Punch and Judy. I just think that's what the genre is. It's like theatre. You know, you might do a farce, but you'd still call it theatre. And I think that must be how it is. These little booths with puppets, you know, we might call them a puppet show, and perhaps he does, but perhaps the genre is Punch and Judy, and his show. So whereas No Sex Please We're British is the name of a farce, but it is a piece of theatre, dramatic art, or whatever you want to call it. So that's what I mean. Parliament is a Punch and Judy game, full of wooden tops, certainly is. Not as good as they used to be. That's the sad thing. Brilliant descriptions, well written, brilliantly read. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Ed Loud. It's great. I have been following with my copy, says Tall Podge. Rog, well, you'll see where I've accidentally paraphrased things and added little words and added a few bits as I go along. But thank you, Tall Podge, Rog. There we go. Anyway, that's it. Tomorrow we'll be back again at the same time. Let's hope we're a little warmer. I'm now going to go and stoke the fires and prepare myself for the evening debacle, which will be the old Voby One-Eye Kenobi show. Enjoyed the reading. Thank you, Jen. Take care. Thank you for watching. Look after yourselves. Back again later. Thank you, Philip and Mary, in your wonderful Harrods jumper. Right, I'm off. I'll see you next time then, shall I? You make sure you're there or there'll be trouble. Bye-bye then.